Okay, so welcome everybody to All Things MSP. This is the Sunday night edition. Of course, that's the night I've been doing them on. This is episode number 2, although last week, if you were here, you know that we had a little bit of trouble. I had not created an email account for the test user that I wanted to use. So I've fixed that for this evening so that we can actually go back in and I can actually show you what it looks like when a customer logs in with limited permissions. So of course, what we're talking about tonight is we're talking about roles and permissions in the SolarWinds MSP RMM dashboard. Now, what you would typically use roles and permissions for is to assign different levels of permissions to your different technicians and people in your business. There may be people that you want to add just simply view-only type access to. Administrative people so they can look up different things on people's accounts, things like that. And then of course, your up to your higher level technicians that would allow you to have all kinds of control over the dashboard. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the details tonight, but one of the things that you should know is that at certain levels, people begin to have the ability to turn things on that would be billable in your account. So you do want to be aware of that. The other thing that you want to be aware of is at certain levels, they have access to different people's computers. So you can do that as well. Now, so that's your internal employees. The other thing that you can also do is you can also give access to certain subcontractors. So say you have an exchange guy and you have a special exchange project with one particular client and you want to give that subcontractor access to that particular client. You can do that with roles and permissions and user groups. And I'm going to show you a little bit of the user groups as well, because one of the things that we want to do is show you that third instance, and that third instance is the ability to give a client access, and of course you only want to give the client access to their specific area or their specific devices. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and do that, but I will do one more thing. I want to say if anybody is following us or watching us on Facebook right now, go ahead and comment so that we know you're here. I will be taking questions throughout the Facebook Live session tonight, and as well, I will take them at the end. Now, at the end, I am open to any types of questions. Of course, some of you know my background. I not only know the technical stuff, but I've also been, I ran my own MSP, so I did all the sales, marketing, all that stuff as well. So please feel free to ask me those things as well, either during the show as you remember them, or we can wait till the end of the show, but I'll probably hold off on answering topics or questions not related to roles and permissions to the end. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch screens. And as you guys can see here, I have my my dashboard up. Let me get rid of a few of these windows here. And the first thing I want to show you is in settings, we have users. And so we have user accounts, roles and permissions, and client groups. So the client groups are what we're going to use to just access the ability to give a certain user access to only certain clients. Now we can actually give them access to groups. So this works very well when we're talking about dealing with contractors. Now, switching back, I just want to check. There we go. Okay. Sorry, guys. This new software, I'm just trying to kind of get acclimated to it a little bit to make sure that I'm showing the right screens at the right times. Roles and permissions. So roles and permissions is where we go in and we set what the user is going to have access to. And then, of course, the user accounts. Now, user accounts is where we set up the different users, what their role is, and what client group they have access to. Okay, so what I've done here is I've actually created a new user called eric@allthingsmsp.com. By the way, that is an actual email address. So if you want to email me separate from my SolarWinds duties or separate from personal stuff, you can actually use this eric@allthingsmsp.com if you just want to talk about all things MSP. So I've created the user. Now there's a couple things I can do from here just so that you know, is I can reset the password now. This is actually where we got stuck last week. where I didn't have the email address for the user we were trying to use set up, and therefore couldn't activate their account. Now, that's a relatively new feature in the dashboard. In the past, you had to you could actually reset the password and everything from the screen. You could set the initial password for the user and things like that. So that's a little bit new. You can also kind of do it self-service, where you can have them reset the password at their next login. But of course, that does require them to have that email be active as well, because they have to get the link and then they have to follow the link to reset the password. And then, of course, as always, we recommend setting up two-factor authentication. It is the best way to make sure that the person who is logging into the dashboard is the right user, because they have the password and the physical device. So that's always a great way to make sure that your security is as tight as it should be. And especially when you're talking about an application that allows remote access into other people's computers, you should definitely be using two-factor authentication to make sure that those users are who they say they are. Okay, so that's all pretty easy, and of course it tells you over here what they, whether they have two-factor turned on, whether they have IP whitelisting turned on, and whether or not their password is set. And this is where I would also change what access they have to in terms of client group, in terms of their role, and all of that. And you can see that I have some that are in bold and some that are not. And the ones that are not are the ones that I've created separate. The ones in bold are the standard ones. You always want to start with a standard one so that you can start with the right base. So super user is going to be your largest or most powerful user. Then it's going to be administrator, and then it's going to be standard. Those are the three types of internal users that you're going to set up. And then the fourth type is client. Now, client is going to be reserved for your end users. Now, you'll also notice that there are ones with classic after them. Those were the original roles and permissions that we had set up that were static. You couldn't change them at all. And so they match up with the old original dashboard roles and permissions. The new ones are updated to reflect just the new roles and permissions schema within the dashboard. Okay, then of course I can manage roles from here, but I'm going to go ahead and close this real quick. I have not made any changes, so it's okay for me to hit cancel. I'm going to go to settings and users and roles and permissions. And this is where we can actually set the individual things that we want people to have access to. So under administrator, you see that there's a whole bunch of things turned off here in general settings. That's because we don't let administrators do or make changes to any of these things. Okay, these are all reserved for super users. So that's one of the big distinctions between super users and administrators. Or actually, sorry, I take that back. It's because this is a built-in system role. If I go to Anthony's admin, I now can actually modify these. I forgot about that. The bold ones, the built-in roles, are not editable, but you have to create a role from that in order to make changes. So here is, now that I've selected one that I've created, I can now go in and change any of these settings. So it is a little bit dangerous, just, to point that out. They would have access to things like, devices and downloading agents and site installation packages in this standard Anthony's admin role. I probably just created this for demo purposes a while back, so you can see that that's what that's for. Now, if I go up to this client and remote access, because this is what I really wanted to show you tonight, this basically started out with the client role. Now, the client role does have some things that it does not have access to by default. And that's one of the differences between super user, administrator, and standard is with the client role, there are some things that I cannot turn on or enable. So make sure that you know that. And it's very important. This is one of the reasons why it's very important to start a client role with the base client role so that you don't accidentally give them permissions that they shouldn't have being an end user. So you can see that all of these are permanently disabled for an end user. And if we go over, you can see all of the different features. You can give them the ability to set settings and whether they can just whether they can just use it or whether they can just view a feature, whether or not they can set up alerting for email and SMS alerts, what reports they can and can't have access to. Now, again, there are certain things that we don't give them access to, like we'll never give them access to the user audit report or the remote support report. Now, we also use this sometimes to make sure that things that are by default or cannot be restricted to a single client, that those are kept hidden from the users. But in almost all cases, they are things that those users would not need. Okay. So the one thing I wanted to show over here is take control. Now the take control access, here you can see I've turned it on and I've set it for view as well. They can't change it, but they can use it, okay? But they don't have access to any of these other things. They have very little access to anything else. They can view Active Discovery. They can't view mobile devices. They can view, some things, but not view others. I've left it very, very sparse because basically we only wanted to give them access to take control. Okay, so that covers roles and permissions. Now, remember guys, if you have any questions, please go ahead and comment so that I can see those in the comments. Don't see any so far. I may flip over to my phone in just a minute just to make sure that there aren't any comments, just, in case this new software isn't working or something like that. Okay, so we go back to settings and users and client groups. So this is where we're actually going to restrict access to a particular client. So in here we have a whole bunch of client groups. We've got all clients, which is obviously bold. We can't edit that one. We have client access, which allows access to one client. We have test, which obviously I used for a demo at some other point, and that gives us access to 2. So you can see here where I was talking about you can actually create a group that allows you to assign a user to multiple clients instead of just one. That's actually handy for a couple of states. Number one, if you have contractors that you're using, you can only give them access to the clients that they need access to. Or if you are a larger MSP and you want to, or you subdivide your teams, you can actually use these groups to keep your teams separate so that their dashboards don't have all the customers in it, but only show the customers that you want them to see because those are the only customers they're working on. Now, of course, you can change these at any time and add groups back and forth or move somebody from group to group. And in this case, let's see, I've got one called the Anthonys, which gives access obviously to the clients called the Anthonys. And again, I'm not going to change anything here. I'm just going to hit cancel. And I'm going to go back to users and user accounts. And on this Eric, allthingsmsp.com, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change this to client plus remote access, which is that role that we looked at before. And then I'm going to change the client group to the Anthonys because I want to give them only access to that client group. So I'll hit save. Wants me to put in my password. It'll always ask you a password on changes to the user's screen. It's just a safety precaution to make sure that nobody's jumped onto your computer, while you've had the dashboard open. Okay, we can close that tab. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to go ahead and log out. Now, the one thing I didn't do is I didn't force two-factor authentication on this customer. And so the only thing I don't know is whether or not it's going to ask me for a password or to set up two-factor authentication when I log in. Oh, so it does want me to do two-factor authentication. Well, we can go ahead and do that. I'm going to delete this user after we're done, so that's not a problem. So let's see. There we have I've got the email. I've confirmed the email address. And just for security's sake, we'll go ahead and set this back to normal for a minute. I don't think it's going to pop up with anything on that screen. But you never know. So and let's see. Let's switch back to there. So you guys can actually see me walking through this quickly. All right, so give me just a second to add this to my Google Authenticator app. All right, so there we go. Now we are in, and as you can see, my client list over here only includes computers that are part of the Anthony's. If I go to workstations, there are all the different computers. And as since I gave it take control permissions, I can now actually give it I actually have access to that remote desktop and can log in. So this is a simple way to give your customers access to the remote management dashboard at any level. If you just want to give it to them for access to their computers, you can do what we just did and set up very limited access to the dashboard. If there is an IT person on site or somebody who kind of does some things for you so that, because in a true managed services model, if you have a helper on site who's willing to do a couple of things before they call you, that's not a bad thing, right? Because it reduces the time you have to spend on devices and allows them to do a couple of things for themselves that they can get done faster rather than having to call you. self-service, in my opinion, is definitely part of the MSP model and something you should consider. The more things that your customers can do for themselves, the more profitable you're going to be. And in a lot of times, the happier they're going to be because they're going to be able to solve their own problems faster without having to get you involved. And that's actually a win-win for both you and your client. Okay, so I'm going to shut down that remote session. Excuse me there. And let's go back to the big screen. There we go. Now, I haven't seen any comments yet, so I'm actually going to go check the check Facebook and see why possibly because I know some of you said you were going to call in, so I just want to make sure that my software is working. And so we are live. Don't know why it's not showing up. But hopefully this was helpful to you guys. And if you have any questions about roles and permissions, you can always get a hold of me here in the Facebook group. Don't forget at Eric Anthony MSP is my Twitter handle, as well as the email address I was using tonight, eric@allthingsmsp.com. You can reach me there as well. I'll hold on. There are a couple of people logged in, so I want to make sure I give chances for people to ask questions if they have any. Oh, I will say that there's a couple of releases that have come out in terms of Viper and Bitdefender. You can find those on the status page for SolarWinds MSP, and all the information in terms of how we're rolling that out and how it affects those Meltdown and Spectre updates from Microsoft. So you want to check those status updates and check your devices in the dashboard. So actually, one of the things you can do to check on that, because I did it today, just so you know, let's switch this back real quick. Back to the screencast. And of course, I will have to log out as my demo user. And log back in as me. Grab my two-factor real quick. Oh, sometimes the timing is just not right. There we go. Okay, so what I wanted to show you here, once we get logged in, is under reports, you can go to managed antivirus reports and go to antivirus protection report. Now, off the top of my head, I know that the update for Bitdefender ends in 789. So that's what I want to look for. So I'm going to run the report and hit generate. Now, by default, the engine does not show up. Your definition versions do, but your engine version does not. So what you're going to want to do is go here to columns and go to engine version. You can also do agent version if you want to. That's actually a handy one as well. So I'm going to turn both of them on and hit generate. And I'll expand this out, and you can see I'm mostly on 785s, but I've got 1789, which is the new one. For those of you who have never seen it, and I hope that's not the case, but it does happen. status.solarwindsmsp.com is where you can find all of the service statuses for the actual software as a service engines by region, but the release notes is what we want to look at today. So we want to go down here to the latest update, and we'll look at the whole report. It tells you the Viper update and what the version is in terms of the definition version. And then the MAV engine, you can see here, is 5.3.34.789. So this is how you will know whether or not the updates for Viper and Bitdefender have been loaded onto your devices so they can create that registry key that's required in order for the Microsoft updates to show up. Now, one other thing with the Microsoft updates is that they will not show in Patch Manager until they're applicable to the device. And one of the things that makes it applicable is the registry key. So the registry key for your antivirus has to be there before the patch will show up in Patch Management as available. Now, from what I've heard, this is also another criteria for the patches to show up is whether or not you have an AMD processor, because Microsoft has stopped deployment of those patches on devices that have some AMD processors. Now, that may have been fixed by now, so I don't know, but just so you know, if you have an AMD processor, you may not be seeing those patches as well. All right. So I think that's just about what I wanted to cover tonight. Oh, one more thing about running this report is you can generate a CSV. The nice thing about generating a CSV is that you can then filter on this engine version column, which really helps because then you can actually find all of the devices that do or don't have that latest engine version installed. And those are rolling out. They're still in the process of rolling out. Obviously, if we try to do all of them at one time, it would, create way too much traffic and be too much of a burden. So we are rolling them out on a schedule. So hope this was helpful. Let me switch back here real quick. There we go. So thanks again for joining me. My name is Eric Anthony. This is All Things MSP. I hope to do this on a probably a semi-weekly schedule. I do have 4 kids, so it's Sunday nights are kind of crazy around here, but trying to push these out as often as possible. I look forward to your comments and I look forward to your suggestions. I would love to have these be all community driven. I can come up with ideas, but they're much more powerful if you guys give me the ideas. It's so much more helpful. So thanks again for joining me tonight. For those of you who did, for those of you who will be watching this recording later, please comment, make suggestions, because I really do want to make these episodes what you guys want to see. So please join me next time. Thanks and have a great evening.